There was a time when the land at the edge of the neighborhood was nothing but dry earth and brittle grass. Years before the homeowners association came to claim it as their own, that patch of ground had a secret buried deep beneath it, a natural underground spring that had sustained generations. When I bought the property, I was told stories of that spring. So, I built my well, not just for water, but as a tribute to the land that had once given life to everything around it. At first, the well was my pride. I'd walk out each morning, draw up a bucket, and water the flowers that surrounded my garden, daisies, tulips, roses that thrived even through summer heat. The neighbors admired it too. Some even came over to fill their own jugs during dry spells, grateful that I had kept the old source alive. For a while, everything felt peaceful. Until the HOA got new leadership. The new president, a woman named Linda, was the type who saw control as her only purpose. She believed everything, from fence height to flower color, needed to be approved. She saw my well not as a symbol of history or community, but as a violation of uniform landscaping standards. I laughed at first, thinking it was just another HOA annoyance that would pass. But I underestimated how far she would go. Letters began to appear in my mailbox, notice of violation. They accused me of unauthorized construction. I replied that the well had existed long before the HOA was even formed, but logic didn't matter to them. A week later, I came home to find a meeting notice taped to my door. They planned to discuss removal of non-compliant property features. I knew exactly what that meant. At that meeting, surrounded by neatly dressed board members, I tried to explain that the well wasn't just decoration, it was a part of the land's natural system. But their eyes were cold, their decisions already made. It sets a bad precedent, Linda said. We can't have individual features that make one property stand out. It ruins uniformity. Uniformity. That was their favorite word, the excuse they used to erase everything unique. Days later, I woke up to the sound of machinery. Outside, HOA workers in orange vests were dismantling my well, brick by brick. I ran out shouting, but they handed me a printed authorization form, approved by HOA ordinance. The well I had cherished for years was reduced to rubble before noon. The ground was left scarred and open, its heart torn out. For days, I felt like something had been taken from me far deeper than water. My garden began to wilt. The soil dried faster than ever. Birds that once gathered near the well disappeared. Even the air felt different, heavy, restless, like the land itself was holding its breath. Neighbors whispered apologies, but none dared to confront the HOA. They had seen what happened to anyone who resisted, fines, threats, even property liens. So they stayed quiet. But nature did not. It started subtly. One evening, rain clouds formed without warning, dark and full, rolling low across the sky. Lightning flashed, not once or twice, but again and again, illuminating the empty spot where the well had stood. Then, in a sudden burst, rain poured down harder than I'd ever seen. Water streamed across driveways, pooling in every dip and crevice. By morning, lawns were soaked, drains overflowed, and puddles stood like mirrors of the storm. The HOA called it a freak weather event. But it wasn't just weather. Something in the soil had shifted. The ground began to swell near where the well used to be, a subtle rise, then a crack. When I stepped closer, I could hear it, a deep, low rumble from beneath, like the earth was growling. Days passed, and the strange occurrences continued. The flowers I had planted long ago began to sprout again, not in neat garden rows, but wildly, across fences and lawns, spreading with unnatural speed. Roots pushed through sidewalks. Blossoms appeared in colors I'd never planted. It was as if the land was reclaiming itself, ignoring every human boundary the HOA had drawn. The board tried to control it, of course. They sent landscapers to trim, spray, and tear out anything that didn't belong. But each time they cleared a patch, the growth returned stronger. Trees that had never existed began to rise near the edge of the lots, their roots digging deep into the broken soil where the well had been destroyed. The HOA blamed me. They sent letters demanding immediate restoration of affected property zones. But how could I restore something nature had decided to own? I stood at my window each night, watching the wild growth creep further under the pale glow of the moon. It wasn't chaos, it was retribution. The well's spirit wasn't gone. It was awake. Linda, the HOA president, called an emergency meeting. She announced plans to contain the environmental anomaly. I knew what that meant: more destruction. More digging. More arrogance. They still didn't understand that this wasn't something they could control anymore. And as the board prepared their next move, I could feel the ground trembling faintly beneath my feet, a warning. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The HOA moved quickly after that emergency meeting. Within 48 hours, contractors appeared again, trucks rumbling, men in hard hats pacing across my front yard with clipboards in hand. Their goal was simple: dig up the strange growth, remove the swelling earth, and restore order. But there was something deeply unnatural about how silent the neighborhood was that morning. The air hung still, heavy with moisture, as if the world was holding its breath again. Even the birds had gone quiet. The ground, once soft and fertile, now felt charged beneath my boots, alive, aware. Linda stood at the center of it all, directing the workers with her usual authority. "We'll dig out the remaining soil and regrade it," she said, as if she were talking about a patch of dirt, not something that had once held life. She didn't see the faint shimmer of water collecting near her shoes, or the subtle pulse in the ground that matched the rhythm of her steps. The digging began. Shovels struck the earth with dull, rhythmic thuds. The first few inches came up dry, but soon after, the soil grew darker, wetter, until suddenly, water burst through the surface like a heartbeat breaking free. The men stumbled back as a thin jet of water hissed upward, spraying their faces. They thought they'd hit a pipe. But there were no pipes here. Within minutes, the trickle turned into a stream, and the stream into a surge. Water poured out from the ground, carving its own path through the grass. It was clear, cold, and moving with intent, not chaotic, but almost deliberate. It flowed around obstacles, curving around the flower beds I had once tended, ignoring everything else until it reached the rubble of the destroyed well. Then the rumbling started again. That it was deeper this time, shaking windows and rattling fences. A vibration rolled through the entire street, strong enough to knock a few of the workers off their feet. They scrambled to shut off their equipment, but the engine sputtered. And died. The air filled with a strange, electric hum, the sound of something old and powerful waking up. The water continued to rise, spilling over driveways, creeping up to doorsteps. People came out of their houses in confusion. Phones were raised, videos recorded, voices shouted. The HOA members shouted back, trying to calm everyone, insisting that it was just a broken main. But no one could explain why the water was warm now, steaming slightly, or why it glowed faintly under the sun. I stood at my porch, drenched from the mist, watching it all unfold. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, only awe. The land was taking back what was stolen. The well hadn't been destroyed. It had been reborn. By midday, the entire lower half of the neighborhood was underwater. Lawns, driveways, even cars sat half-submerged in a shallow flood. The HOA office, a proud, two-story building at the end of the main street, was surrounded by knee-deep water that reflected the sky like a mirror. The board members waded through it, shouting into their phones, demanding help. But the water didn't stop. Everywhere they had once imposed their rules, nature erased them. The freshly painted fences warped. Perfectly trimmed hedges collapsed. The ornamental lawns, once green from chemical care, turned muddy and wild. But my garden, the only one untouched, began to bloom again, brighter than ever. Neighbors gathered on higher ground, whispering about what was happening. Some said it was divine punishment. Others thought it was a natural sinkhole. But deep down, I knew, the earth was settling its score. When night fell, the storm returned. Lightning danced across the clouds, striking close enough to make the ground quake. Thunder rolled over the flooded streets, echoing like a warning. Linda and her board huddled inside their office, trying to protect their paperwork, their rules, their precious order. But order was the very thing that had brought this chaos. By morning, the once pristine community looked like something out of another world. The water had receded slightly, but it left behind thick layers of mud. From that mud, shoots of green had already started to emerge, wild vines, reeds, and unfamiliar plants growing at impossible speed. They twisted around lampposts, crept up mailboxes, and framed front porches like living monuments. Linda called for a government inspection. Environmental officers came, but their equipment failed, sensors malfunctioned, compasses spun without direction. One officer muttered, "This ground isn't normal." They took samples, snapped photos, and left with puzzled looks. Nothing made sense anymore. Then came the final straw. A few days later, when the water had drained into the far fields, a new well began to form, right where the old one had stood. Not built by hands, but shaped naturally by the earth itself. Its walls glistened with mineral veins, and water shimmered at the bottom, bubbling softly like a living thing. The land had rebuilt its own heart. Linda, furious and desperate, gathered her board members again. They decided to fill it permanently. They brought in gravel trucks, concrete mixers, and heavy equipment. The workers were hesitant, they'd seen what happened last time, but money speaks louder than fear. The first load of gravel was dumped in, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then came a deep, resonant crack, like the sound of thunder beneath the soil. The ground shifted. The machines tilted. And before anyone could react, the earth opened again. A geyser of water exploded upward, so powerful it threw chunks of concrete into the air. The trucks rolled back, engines sputtering as steam and mist filled the scene. People screamed and scattered. Linda fell to her knees in the mud, clutching her clipboard as the well erupted like a volcano of vengeance. Water cascaded down the street, carrying away everything that wasn't rooted: papers, fences, signs. The HOA rules had dissolved, literally washed away. And in the center of it all, the new well glowed faintly under the twilight, alive and breathing. Nature had spoken once more. But its judgment wasn't over yet. The HOA still thought they could fight back. They were wrong. The neighborhood woke in silence the next morning. For the first time since the storm began, there was no thunder, no rumble beneath the ground, only the soft whisper of wine through the trees. But the air carried something different now, not peace, but warning. The HOA building stood damaged and half-collapsed, its white paint streaked with mud, its proud sign crooked and hanging by one bolt. The new well shimmered quietly at the end of the street, like an eye that refused to close. The water inside it pulsed gently, reflecting the dawn light with a strange, almost sacred glow. I stepped outside, my boots sinking slightly into damp earth. The grass was still wet, but it wasn't flooded anymore. The land had drunk deeply and was now resting. Flowers had sprung up everywhere, even on rooftops, in gutters, in the cracks of driveways. Nature had woven itself through everything artificial, reclaiming every inch it had lost. Neighbors emerged from their homes, stunned by the beauty around them. Some whispered prayers. Others took pictures, their voices trembling as they spoke about how everything looked alive. But among them stood Linda, mud-streaked and exhausted, her clipboard gone, her authority shattered. She looked around at the wild, blooming chaos with disbelief and fear. That morning, she gathered the remaining board members once again. Their meeting wasn't in the HOA office anymore, that building was uninhabitable. Instead, they met under a tent near the entrance of the neighborhood, surrounded by the very nature they tried to suppress. Their plan was desperate: to drain the well completely, pave over it, and reclaim the property. They called in yet another contractor, a new crew. From outside the county, men who didn't know the land story. By noon, the trucks arrived again. But as soon as the heavy machinery rolled onto the muddy soil, the ground began to tremble, slow at first, then stronger. Birds scattered into the sky in waves, their cries echoing through the air. The men shouted, trying to steady the vehicles, but one after another, engines sputtered and died. The same strange magnetic force that had broken equipment before was back, stronger this time. Then came the sound. A deep, echoing groan rose from beneath the ground, not the mechanical roar of an engine, but something organic, ancient, and furious. The air thickened. The trees bent inward, their branches trembling as if whispering warnings. And then, without warning, the earth erupted. The well exploded in a geyser of blinding white water, shooting high into the air before crashing back down in torrents. Mud and rock flew in every direction. The force of it threw people off their feet. The water rolled through the streets again, not as a flood this time, but as a cleansing tide. This time, the land wasn't angry, it was final. The flood moved with precision, washing through the neighborhood in smooth, unstoppable waves. It didn't enter homes that had respected the land, the older cottages, the gardens left wild, but it tore through every property the HOA had built to beautify the area. Perfect lawns were stripped bare. Stone fountains crumbled. Cement paths cracked open like dry bread. And then the strangest thing happened. When the water finally settled, it didn't drain away. Instead, it formed a shallow lake where the HOA's Central Park used to be, still, clear, and glimmering in the golden light of afternoon. Around its edges, reeds and lilies had already begun to grow. The air smelled clean again, as though the land had exhaled for the first time in years. The HOA was finished. Their offices destroyed, their funds drained, their authority gone. Residents began to leave one by one, seeking new places to live, but many stayed. They built wooden walkways around the new lake, planting native flowers and letting the wild growth continue. The land no longer needed permission to be itself. Linda left last. No one saw her pack. She simply drove away one morning, down the dirt road that had once been paved smooth by HOA order. As her car disappeared into the distance, the first gentle rain began to fall, not a storm, just a soft drizzle, as if the earth itself was saying goodbye. Over the next months, the neighborhood transformed completely. What was once a regimented, manicured suburb became a living ecosystem. Birds returned in flocks. Deer grazed where fences once stood. The lake became the center of everything, its surface always calm, always gleaming. And from its edge, a faint stream of water trickled outward, flowing gently toward the old fields beyond that. I often sat near the water's edge, watching reflections of the sky ripple across it. The well, or what had become of it, never ran dry again. Every time I looked into it, I saw something different, light, movement, sometimes even faces that seemed to shimmer beneath the surface. It wasn't frightening anymore. It felt protective, watchful, like the land was alive and aware, standing guard over what was rightfully its own. People who visited called it a miracle. They said the water healed the soil, that flowers grew faster near it, that animals flocked to it instinctively. Some said they could hear faint sounds from beneath. The echo of running water, or the heartbeat of the land itself. As for me, I stopped trying to explain. I simply listened. Because I understood something the HOA never did. Nature doesn't need revenge, it needs respect. And when you take what belongs to it, it doesn't destroy you out of hatred. It reclaims itself out of balance. Years later, when travelers pass through the valley, they always stop by the lake. They ask about the strange well that glows under moonlight, about the vines that bloom only at night, about the quiet peace that hangs over the land. And I tell them the truth. I tell them that once upon a time, a group of people tried to steal what could never be owned. And when they did, the land remembered. The well still breathes beneath the surface. The water still hums faintly when the wind passes over it. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the world is still and the air smells like rain, you can hear it. The whisper of the earth, gentle but eternal. It says only one thing. I take care of my own.